It's the pre-market ritual you never knew you needed. Get ready to Gap and Go with the Calum Trading Institute.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Gap and Go. What's the best way to start? Concerns about the economy. I think we've seen in the last few months revisions downward, consumer spending slowing down. Will the Fed actually pivot? President Trump has been very pissed on that end. Inflation data came out last night. Although core is now sitting above 3% for the full year, there's still calls for interest rates to start coming down. And I think last time we were here, we talked about how if you dissect inflation into two categories, you look at it from a core goods versus services. It's really the core goods that's driving up inflation today. And we know, the obvious reason why, it's because of the tariff. Jason, maybe you can share your thoughts first. And if there's actually anything concerning coming from the economy.
Sorry. Well, actually, in today's scenario, bad news is good news. Diba? On the economy. Diba? Kasi remember, guys, that 2 weeks ago, diba, in our last Gap and Go, we were talking about markets parang medyo vulnerable at this point, right? Because stocks were like overbought in the US, dollar was oversold. Then you had the Fed meeting coming in earnings, diba? Okay. So, right, yung Fed meeting, right, sounded a little bit hawkish. Sabi ng Fed, okay, no rate cut. We're going to wait for the tariff impact, right? Then a few days later, you had the jobs data come out, right? That was really, really bad. And I thought it was noise, but just reading about the recent economic data is coming out, parang, I think it's painting a picture of, slowing down. I don't think it's a deep slowdown or whatever, but I think it's enough to justify a rate cut coming by, September. So that's why you saw the market pricing swung very wide after that jobs data. From like 40% to almost 80% chance of rate cut on September. And that's why, everything's going up again, right? And the dollar is just consolidating, after briefly rallying above the 50-day.
But that's the other part, right? If you look at 2Q earnings coming out so far, I think across the board, we talked about it, great earnings, especially from your big tech. And that, and that at the end of the day, for me, is really what's driving market strength. So you can probably see like a, few days of a drop in the stock market, which happened, I think 2 weeks ago, may scared, diba? Kala mo, simula eh. But in reality, like, how can you really have a significant drop when earnings, especially Microsoft, and it's not just how good earnings are, but if you look at CapEx, it's still increasing and elevated quarter on quarter for the last few quarters.
And actually, the thing was coming into this earnings season, actually bumaba na yung expectations. I think the market was already expecting parang 6% lang. And the actual was actually more than double that. Parang 12% plus. So I think everything is still a go-in for the risk assets.
Mm-hmm. All right, Brian, maybe you can share your thoughts about, I haven't seen valuations in a long time at today's level. Now, it's not across the board. I think it's just that the hot stocks, for example, Figma the other day, now sitting at 50 times, 60 times price to sales, 100 times EV over EBITDA. Crazy valuation. I'm not saying it's a bad company. In fact, Figma is already profitable. It's just that you're starting to see more of these companies now come about. Even hotter than anything else was your crypto space, right? Yeah. So a lot of excitement coming from the stable coins. How we call Bitcoin the digital gold. You know what they call Ethereum today? They call it the digital oil, because everything now is running on the Ethereum platform, which I actually won't disagree on, because if you look at it, the use of encryption, the use of what's that? I keep on forgetting that crypto term, for verification and all those other stuff are all being done on stable coins. Like if you look at the Philippine SEC, ganun din actually. They actually made a point that they're moving everything to the blockchain. And if you look at the blockchain system, everything today, the only thing that you can trust and have that same quality is through the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's happening today.
Yeah, and that technology also is contributing to surges in a few sectors like your data centers, diba? Your starting with your chips also, diba? All those processing power needed for all those technologies to run. Even your pent-up demand for energy is causing a lot of uh, like new issues rising, like yung mga usual oklo natin. But one thing interesting in this market is, well, it happens most of the time whenever indices or stocks really rise. If you tack on your QQQ against your MMFI, diba? MMFI is the all issues above 50-day EMA. So if you notice the past month, parang pababa siya yung MMFI, meaning the breadth is going down while this QQQ is going up, which is very usual in a parang euphoric or channeling up market na
I
as
wouldn't
it
say euphoric.
rises. Yeah, I won't say euphoric, pero rising, as it rises, it's like the pie is getting really small. It really narrows. The market really narrows whenever it goes up. So ang nangyayari, hinahabol, there's FOMO factor Parang hinahabol yung winners all the time. So it focuses, parang it narrows into a few winners. And if you notice, nahihirapan the past month, yung things other than the leaders. Pagka nasa baba ka, talagang bebentahan ka talaga. And if you're up there, if you're strong, you really get really strong.
Let's be honest. How long has the market been channeling from here? Right?
Yeah.
So if you look at it, it's not really a big increase. I think what is more surprising is how sturdy it is. So normally when we talk about channels, it's always divergence, humihina na yung momentum. But this thing just continues on channeling. And, that's the thing we always talk about, because when we look at divergence in channels, these are usually warning signs for us. Diba? I mean, traditional technical analysis will tell you humihina na yung packet which is also correct. Kasi hingal diba? The problem is today, it's just money just keeps on pouring into the US system. When you look at the global economy, everybody is slowing down. Business is so difficult. Just look at entire Southeast Asia and Philippines. We can talk about Philippine 2Q earnings in a bit. But when you're searching for growth, that's really the issue from a global standpoint. Where else do you go except the US? And that's the reason why US continues to trade at high valuation versus the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's always at least this year, I think the Trump administration was able to diverge the focus from debt to now growth. Parang dun napunta yung attention ng tao. Parang so far you're buying the US despite the trillions of debt. Parang nawawala yung risk on that issue. And it's going into AI and all these new technologies that nowhere else you can find it except for the US. So dapat nandun ka talaga. So at least at this moment, while this market is rising, yun yung focus ngayon dun sa, it's all about growth now.
But well, actually, my view on the debt, actually, US companies naman it's the government naman that's and I do think it's reflecting naman Like if you look at the bonds, diba, they haven't really performed that well, diba? Especially long-term bonds. And if you look at the dollar, diba, it's having one of the worst years in 50 years. Diba? So, I think it's being reflected naman, diba? But actually it doesn't affect the case naman for US equities. Actually, it could even make them better. right? Isa pa na. Okay, you want to avoid this financial repression, diba? And go to assets that can hedge that.
It's surprising now kasi they're clamoring for rate cuts while the market is all-time high. So
That's the thing.
very new, as in very new.
Usually, you go to a rate cut pag mahina na yung at least a reflection of the real economy, which is the stock market, diba?
Oh.
When confidence is bad or
Yeah,
expectation.
that's why si Powell's really hesitant. If you remember his last nung June ba yun, or July, when he was asked why he wasn't cutting, because all the forecasters that I know are expecting inflation to go up because of these tariffs, sabi niya. Kaya he's hesitant to cut it. But the problem is, hindi nangyayari every time and time again pag lumalabas yung CPI, pababa. And I don't know if it's really difficult to change your position if you're at that level, but that's what's making him Kaya nagagalit si Trump.
But that's the thing, right? Does the stock market really paint a proper picture of the real economy just because of how big of a heavyweight
It's not.
the big tech is, diba?
It's not reflective of the economy.
It's like the Philippines, diba? Nasa ilalim ang stock market, mura. Does it paint sobrang sama ba ng negosyo ba ng Pilipinas?
Parang
Okay. Well,
I don't know.
but, I think that's what the markets are trying to figure out today, diba? Parang is the US big tech, which is expected to grow 18% per year in the next 5 years, where else do you find a growth like that? And will that train even stop? Which is the markets are saying no, it will continue. Diba?
I think it's parang I think we're in a K-shaped economy. Diba? You have this handful of mega cap companies who are just, killing it, and everyone else. Diba? So I think one example, diba, you saw the recent news on Nvidia in China.
Yep.
Diba? So Nvidia has been allowed to sell again. Diba? Tapos ang gagawin nila 15% yung commission ng US government.
Correct.
US commission.
Diba? So
on AMD.
Versus blanket not allowing them to sell, mas mura di hamak ang bayaran mo lang ng commission. Nvidia AMD pays commission tariffs to the US government. Diba? So that's why these guys are, just killing it. Diba? Versus everyone else who has to deal with the tariffs. Diba?
Yeah,
And this is a great transition maybe into Hong Kong and China, because one of the main messages from China was that, hey, US is trying to carve its own path. China says, don't buy NVIDIA H20 chips. Buy it from our own. So I think it's great because you're having two parts where the stock market or the tech companies in China are significantly, much cheaper compared to your big tech. Although it's also warranted because margins are 2/3 of that in the US. But I think this goes to show, what about China? What about, where else is there something like, should we even be bothering to be looking at these guys? I like China. I like Hong Kong tech. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. It's just that from a flows perspective, parang US pa rin number one, diba? No questions asked.
Yeah. I don't know. Parang tinamaan yata kasi yung China being an export country. So
I'm sure.
Yeah.
US will do everything it can to slow China down, but at what cost will it be to the US individual? So although we saw inflation rise, you look at consumer confidence index, consumer spending, both negative, Jason. Jason, maybe you can share those exact numbers. But at the end of the day, you want to bring back manufacturing in where 90% of the goods are low value items. There's no way US is going to compete with China on that end, right? Maybe on the higher tech, which is on AI, which is they made a clear statement that they're not going to lose. I mean, they cannot afford to lose the AI war, right? Which has been clear from the very beginning. But on the rest of the goods, is it really worth it? Because at the end of the day, you penalize the US consumer.
Yeah. Naghang yata siya.
All right. So with that being said, Hong Kong, I mean, I guess that's the reason why it's still consolidating for a bit. But nonetheless, Hong Kong still very much there.
Ako, I like Hong Kong. You can really find a few sectors that are really showing growth, like your robotics, diba?
I think it's still AI that's still
AI.
also I mean, tech and AI is still the main play in Hong Kong and China, in my opinion.
Yeah, slowly but surely, yung IPOs mo are doing well. Diba? The past few issues, yung mga retailers are okay.
What's the retailers? Sorry, nakatingin lang kasi ako sa tech.
Hindi yung, ayun, yung, sorry, yung milk tea. Tapos, I forgot the ticker, yung makeup May isang makeup And there's a new one ngayon. There's a new retailer.
You have coconut drinks.
Coconut drink, yeah.
RTD drinks.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think even on my end, it's just
Ayan, bumalik na si Jason.
it's just that if I look at it from a flows perspective, it's just not there. But I like Hong Kong and China. I think it's every dog has its day, and I think Hong Kong tech and especially the AI aren't that far behind, right? I think that's the reason why. Although in the US, for example, like in the robo taxi autonomous vehicles, you have Waymo, you have Tesla already launching over the past month. Looks fantastic, looks great, but it looks like there's still many concerns about just running pure autonomous. Right? And on the flip side, China is playing it much more conservative. They actually have their own, and everybody's integrating both hardware and software, which is through Horizon Robotics, which is owned by Baidu, and all the big boys, Tencent and whatsoever. Right. So on one hand, it's a race, but we still don't know who's going to be winning on that end.
Yeah, I'm still also bullish. I think China is going to be at least during the Trump admin. It's going to be a very good second place to the US. I was thinking of the worst, that really majority of the trade will be shut down kung mag-away sila. But ngayon, hindi naman I think trade is still doing okay between them. Just as long as, I think in China's yung macro nila is set up already. I think the government has pumped enough already for the market to stay afloat. You look at your property packet, parang hindi na siya and didn't show signs of any further weakness.
Oh, fun fact lang pala. China trade surplus hits record 1.2 trillion.
Saan pupunta yung dollars?
I think people are also waiting for yung tariff, right? What's happening?
Yeah, it was delayed another 90 days, if I'm not mistaken.
Go indefinite delay lang yun.
Yeah. Okay. Let's head on. Probably, I'm not surprised, and I keep on saying this, I'm not surprised by the Philippines movement, but it's weak, obviously, diba? Are there challenges? If I look at 2Q consumer. So you had URC, Mondenisin come out. URC on one end. Where's my Monde? Sorry. Monde coming out. There was a question about earnings being priced in or not. And my answer was, I actually think it is priced in. The problem is it's just no growth. And how do you, it's the same case like what we talked about before. If I'm buying a company with no growth, how much valuation do you pay for? And would you pay where it was before? And my answer was no. Right? Because historically, they've been trading at 22, 25 times on average PE. Today, they're at the cheapest, 13, 14 times. But the question is, there's no growth. Even DNL, no growth. Like, how do you pay a premium for these companies or go back to its premium? Right? I'm not saying they're bad companies, and I'm not saying we might not return to it, but it's as long as the entire consumer companies are still consolidating, I think it's going to just stay here. And from an investment standpoint, it's great because you get paid your 5% cash dividend, diba? I think it's just a matter of keeping expectations in check where parang breakout. Iniisip ng mga tao, ito na eh. Diba? Problema lang, pangit pa earnings eh. Paano eh, diba?
I think the unfortunate part is that our neighbors have started to break out.
That's the other part.
Baka meron naman bullish take on like on a macro level, let's say if interest rates but
Well, of course, like all the GDP earnings naman, I think is well priced in. And of course, yeah, they're backward looking naman yun, diba? So I guess the question is what's next? What's gonna get us out of this, doldrums, diba? And I think it's easy. Kasi parang I think the policy in the Philippines is really tight. So totoo lang. Diba? Like inflation has come down to like what 0.8%, diba? And the BSP has moved, but I think obviously still not enough. Not enough. So the question is that will the environment allow the BSP to cut without weakening the peso too much?
Which remains to be seen. But I think they will cut a lot in the next 12 months. So that might be pressure on your peso.
Yeah, so kailangan mag-operate yung dollar, right? It's a
Okay.
tricky balance.
Mm-hmm. Banks first or rebalancing na lang first. So companies that were supposed to be on hold finally approved, plus in, bloom out. I think one of the bigger surprises was RCR because I think markets were pricing in RCR to be included in the PSCI index, which did not happen. And on the flip side, it was included in the MSCI rebalancing. So I think yun yung consuelo sa RCR. Same time, PNB in. And one of our favorite issues, DNL out. And
that's good.
I don't know. When I looked at earnings, I don't want to say anything. They were okay. They weren't. No, I'm lying. Pangit ang 2Q earnings ng DNL. But hopefully that, pangit ang 2Q earnings ng lahat ng consumer. So I think that all remains to be seen.
It's not a seasonal Hindi naman Kasi
no, it's year on year. So, and it's an election year last quarter. So anyway, other than that, what else do you have? I think more concerning than the consumer companies, because I think most of these guys are already priced in, is the banks. Because your big banks are breaking down. And I think this is a bigger concern than anything else. Because for the longest time, we've talked about how the banks are making so much money because of CASA, diba? And interest rates, or like what Jason was talking about, is expected to come down, and that's expected to impact CASA. And what's happening, because you start moving it out to loan side, we've been hearing patayan sa presyo. It's very competitive also. Trying to get new accounts, for refinancing, which are up maybe this year. So just something to watch out for. Now, I don't think there's anything systemic with the banks. I think they're just coming from a very, very high base, because like BDO made on average like
Yeah.
90 billion pesos the last few years, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So if they make like 70 billion, that's still fantastic. The problem is you're
Mhm.
just coming from a high base this 2024.
Parang transition the banks are going to parang yung transition window nila from your treasuries to your through your loan growth, no, di ba? Tama.
Yes.
Since pababa yung yields mo.
But it's
And
not
you're-
easy to out when business is tough also, diba?
Tama. Yeah. It's in that window.
So there's a transition. I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just saying you might see a short-term hit, which is why the banks are being sold off in the short term. Well, your bigger banks are being sold off in the short term. Okay, other thing is that's been really benefiting. Let's talk about obviously your REITs have been the biggest performers. In fact, RCR is just sitting at 5.1, 5.2% na lang eh. But that's also because it's being included in indices. But I think the point being here is that your REITs have outperformed because everybody's expecting them to benefit from lower interest rates. Other things that we have, PLDT, 7% dividend, looks attractive. Globe coming to 6.5% cash dividend, also looking very attractive, plus the upside on GCash IPO. Yeah, so I think everybody's concerned about the ban on in-gaming towards the wallet, which for me they should. But I think even if you remove that, GCash is still profitable. Like Mint did 5.9 billion in the 2Q. I repeat, 5.9 billion. That's 24 billion for the full year of 2025.
So
Earnings on Mint alone. And let's say like 40%. That's being generous in my opinion. Is coming from e-gaming. Sayo na yan, right? I think GCash should still make like 10, 11 billion. I mean, just say it on that end. Okay, other things that we're missing? Anything that we need?
Well, yung malakas na tata tubig eh. Manila Water, right? Up 30% earnings.
Yep. Yeah, I think your utilities are doing well. Right? Even Meralco. The problem with Meralco, I think everybody's waiting on the overhang from the sale of Romang, diba? Kasi they were just recently awarded the original shares coming from Land Bank. So I think that's what's causing the overhang in Meralco today. But Manila Water, I can't say anything about EKR.
galing ano. Yung surprise earnings this round yung Maycal.
Yeah, I think they talked about good earnings, mainly because of the recovery in nickel prices on that end. So I think it should be good for Nickel Asia. So I'm not. Maybe Jason has other thoughts about base commodities.
I think medyo tricky pa. Kasi there's a lot of protectionism also. And I think there's also a lot of demand from AI, and all the fiscal spending of government. But you also have to navigate the changing trade policies. But actually, I think that's good for us, for ASEAN. So I've been seeing a lot of like Indonesian companies who were benefiting from, China being tired, for example. Parang lumilipat kasi yung trade. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity in that space also. And parang di na, goods are not flowing as freely. So yeah, I think it's an interesting space also.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it for today's Gap and Go. We're watching the U.S. really carefully, especially this notion that U.S. needs to cut interest rates. Inflation came in a little bit expected. I think one thing that everybody here has to expect is that inflation is going to be higher in the U.S. than the rest of the world just because of the tariff in the next 12 months. And I think that's what's causing a concern with emerging market, because then if the emerging market start cutting, will you cause a weakness in their own currency, right? So if you ask me, there's a reason why S&P has continued to outperform versus the rest of the world, right? We talked about channels, and I think that channeling formation will likely continue as long as there's no systemic risk in the markets today. With that being said, if you look at 2Q earnings, great earnings on big tech as compared to poor earnings in emerging market. I'd say let's just get straight to it. Poor earnings in the Philippines, especially in the consumption end. Inflation coming down, interest rates also coming down. If you ask me, the best bet right now with the highest asymmetric risk reward is your Philippine Treasury. Just because inflation is sitting at 0.9%. In fact, this is very much different than the 3% that you're seeing, or 2.7% that you saw in the US last night. All right. So with that being said, watch for the rebalancing. We might see some excess happen, especially with the removal of Bloom. I think that's probably the best bet coming into this Friday. But again, we're still waiting and seeing, and hopefully markets gives us more opportunity. Just keep your expectations in check for both developed markets and emerging market. All right. So with that being said, thanks guys so much, and I will see you guys 2 weeks from now.